The next one is on the radical vision of India's sustainability. And to introduce the theme and the speaker, I invite Ben. Ben, can you please take over?
Yeah, good evening, Hari. Good evening, Padu. Yeah, it's an absolute privilege to introduce Hari. I've been known him for a couple of decades now. And firstly, thank you, Hari, for convincing Padu to do this session with us. I would take all 30 minutes if I were to introduce Hari. He's last 4 decades of experience in the area of sustainability. I was just trying to make short notes how to introduce him. So it was quite a big challenge. And I would clearly say he has been the pioneer of sustainability nearly 3 decades back. And it's good to have him here because he's also an author. He started off writing a lot to advocate the concept of sustainability. So he's been a pioneer of sustainable homes. He's an advocate of sustainability. He's an activist. We can't go into every details of what he's doing. That's why I said we'll take all 30 minutes if I were to do that. Now he's busy educating in the online education space, in green building space, and I could go on and on. I would just like to mention the awards he's won. Just the 2 of them. He's won many awards. One is the Asia Water Champion Award from Manila, ADB Manila, and the other one is Green Apple Award from UK. So I leave you both to discuss the area of sustainability. I think Padu has done an amazing job with this book. It's a game changer book. So we look forward to hearing about the book. Over to you, Hari.
Thank you, Ben, and good evening to you and to the rest of the audience here. I was here for the last session, and I can see that there are some very discerning listeners out here. Hi, Padu. I'm seeing you after some time. Good morning to you. And I think, well, you're doing your bit of branding by keeping that book very nicely strategically located on the shelf out there. Are you in Pittsburgh? Are you in Washington, D.C.? Where are you now?
I'm in Pittsburgh.
In Pittsburgh, okay, at home. Where do I start? We have about 25 minutes. We worked on this book. It's now 18 months or 20 months since we started off on that. So one thing I didn't see after you took over at some point in time is why this book and how did it happen? I mean, after 40 years of a life as an officer of various government agencies, what happened that you could make this book?
Well, you know, Hari, you go to any library or a bookstore, you find endless rows of books on energy. And what is this book that is going to make a difference? Now, if you look at these books on energy, most of them are on what I would call as the supply side of the energy equation. So you have books on oil and the international oil situation. You have books on the coal sector and the coal issues in India, for instance.
What happened some 20 months ago that you thought that there is the possibility of putting a book together? What was that happened?
What happened was that I found that energy efficiency, a subject which the book is all about, has not been given the attention it deserves. It was more like an embellishment, more like icing on the cake. It was more like motherhood and apple pie, as they say. But there wasn't sufficient attention, whereas the fact of the matter is, and that's what the title of the book, First Fuel, is, that more energy has been saved through energy efficiency in the years by than has been generated through oil or coal or other forms of energy. So energy efficiency should not be something which recedes into the background. It should be the first fuel. So I thought it was time that this was brought to the attention of the government, of individuals, that efficiency could play a huge role in this transition that we are undergoing.
Okay, I got that. As if I'm a young aspirant writer, or if I'm, let's say, 45, 50 years old, or I have spent 35 years like you did in government service or whatever other service, and what would your advice be to such a person who is now aspiring to become an author, shall we say? What would that idea be? Because, you spent all those years, you didn't see a story there until possibly something happened in your head that you decided that you could possibly, that you could turn this into authorship for yourself. And what would that advice be?
Well, the motivation obviously came from the outside. There were people like you who motivated me to write the book. So that is one. But clearly what one needs to do, and there isn't like a eureka moment here. It's just that when experience and your background and your search for solutions come to a point where you feel that, hey, there is something here, a story to be told. And when you string up your various experiences together, you do find that there is some sense in this nonsense which is going through your head. And that's what happened to me in the energy field. As you know, I've been in the energy field for 40 years, worked with the World Bank and international agencies. And I thought it was time that I put thought to paper. Right. I'm no writer, I'm no author. And with the help of others and with the help of a great publisher and the editor, we're able to string together a story.
Okay. Without getting pedantic about it, what is this energy efficiency market that India has over the next, say, 10, maybe 15 years? Can you explain that with a very simple example of perhaps a hotel, a 5-star hotel of, say, 200 rooms, and what energy efficiency means to such a hotel?
Well, first, let's take the broad question first. If you look at India's energy journey in the next 15, 20 years, it's going to be a very exciting journey. It's going to look at alternate sources of energy and so on and so forth. And we are today using fossil fuels. So we need to move from a world dominated by oil and coal to a world dominated by renewable energy. And energy efficiency could be the vehicle or the bridge to do so. Now, coming to your specific question about a hotel or an industry, obviously, energy is one of the inputs into the economic activity of that particular business. In the case of a hotel, it's energy used in air conditioning and lighting, in their kitchens, in their washrooms, and so on and so forth. And one were to look at the costs, the cost of energy is not trivial. It could be a sizable portion of the total operating costs. So there are various ways and methods to save energy. But my book is not about methods and how you save energy. There are n number of books, treatises on energy audits in hotels and so on. My book is on the process which India underwent in ushering energy efficiency in the last 40 to 50 years. So the younger generation can be inspired by what had happened in the past. It was not so much the goal of achieving efficiency, but the process that we followed. Not very many people know that India was among the first countries to have set up an institutional arrangement to deliver energy efficiency in the corporate sector. India was among the first countries which recognized energy efficiency as part of power sector strategy, and so on and so forth. There are a number of anecdotes, stories, heroes, unsung institutions, and so on, who I thought needed to be recognized, and their contributions also, brought to the fore.
All right, I will let that pass since you are positioning it in a certain way. If I were to look at, let's say, the things that have happened in just the last, say, 15, 18 months since that time that book was begun in, say, January last year when we first spoke about it. Today, if you look at the market, if the Ambanis decide to do what they are saying that they will, it'll mean that we will have 500 GW of solar farm grid that will feed the grid for India. Today, we have no more than, as we saw last week with Modi going and inaugurating something or the other at about 30 GW. We are at about 100 GW solar and about 370 to 400 GW as, the conventional power grid, with 70% of that being coal and the rest of it being uranium and hydro. Now, if you look at that 400 GW, that's historic, plus this 100, which is 500, as against the other 100 solar GW that we're going to get, if Ambani has his way, how does it change the scenario for this country? And does that make us energy secure? What are the ecological imbalances that they just might create?
Well, there's a lot of questions in this one particular question that you asked. Obviously, one needs freedom of action and freedom of choice. One needs to look at renewables as part of the overall strategy, but renewables in and by itself are not going to cut it. Renewables are intermittent, renewables are variable, and one would need fossil fuels and so on as a backup to these renewables. So my question to you, my answer to you is that, well, it's a step in the right direction because overall, the emphasis is in moving India towards carbon neutrality or net zero. And that's going to probably happen not in the next decade or two, but probably the next 3 to 4 decades. By 2070, that's what the Indian government has stated. But in the process, one needs to usher in a number of technologies. And how do you generate green hydrogen? It is through, probably renewables like, solar. And that's the kind of approach that they are following.
At the transportation levels, but I'm saying at the grid level, if we were to completely move to the solar hours of 10 a.m. to say 3 p.m., what happens to the grid and to the stability of the grid? How is India going to take that as the future? A question I think, I was trying to map even at the time of maybe mid last year, when you're trying to see how you could structure the book. And I said, we must have something on the future of India. And this is one thing that is haunting me still, because we don't have an answer there for the younger professionals who are wanting to read such a book, let us say.
I don't think we have a complete answer, but we have a picture. And the picture is an integrated energy network.
Yep.
The integrated energy network is where renewable energy, wind and solar, will coexist with conventional energy, particularly coal and so on. The idea here is that, as I said, wind and solar are intermittent. So you need balancing power. And that's what the integrated energy network would do. But the integrated energy network will work on both sides of the energy equation. And that's very important. It will not just be a supply side strategy. It will also be a demand side strategy. So it will actually go out and market efficiency, get people to adopt efficiency methods, and these efficiency methods will make an impact on the operation of the grid. Now, that would mean that every building, every consumer would, in a sense, be connected to the overall network, and that's what the integrated energy network is, through digital transformation and so on and so forth. That kind of scenario or that picture is emerging, and there are bits and pieces of it. Now we just need to kind of pull it all together, and that's going to be a humongous task. But that's a task which not just India is working on, that's a task in which other nations are also working on. So integrated energy network is probably the way to go.
Okay, that's fair. Before I lose the rest of you on some of these complexities that Padu is trying to articulate, let me put it in very simple ways. Let's say you are running, to go back to that example of a hotel, a 5-star hotel, and let's say you have a bill of say 50 lakh rupees a month, and therefore you have 6 crore rupees chalked up at the end of the year. Even in these COVID times, I know many hotels have such orders of magnitude of electricity bills. Now, if someone walked up to you and said, hey, I'm willing to go make an investment in your hotel, in a way that I bring that down by say 20 lakhs, and then I share the booty with you on that delta of saving that I bring to you, is part of what are called ESCO arrangements. Now, why is this important? Because if you do not bring, as he says, energy efficiency into economic systems, we are not going to go ahead. That is, even if we let us say, augment energy generating capacities, as India is seeking to do just now, with the growth that we inevitably know will happen at the GDP levels, this trajectory of energy demand has to be met and can be met only with energy efficiency. That, in effect, is what he's saying. But I'll go back to one more question with you. When do you see in India the end of the coal era? Today we are at 67%, as you know.
The end of the COVID era?
The coal, C-O-A-L, the coal era.
Okay. That's a very interesting question, Hari. Now, if you look at it globally, since pre-industrial times to today, the world has heated up by 1 degree centigrade, and 0.3 degrees centigrade is on account of coal. India is the second largest producer of coal. Almost 70% of our power generation is from coal. And there is now a need to transit away from coal. The transition is not going to be simple. It's going to be arduous. It's going to be difficult. But there is definitely a move towards moving India towards transition. The power generating capacity is in coal. Power generation is the largest user of coal. And to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we need to tackle that.
Krika, I'd like you to see how you can put a year or an end of a decade.
I was coming to that. How you could do that? One is some of the power plants, we have about 50,000 megawatts or 50 gigawatts of power generation, which can be decommissioned. And one needs to decommission that. But my sense is decommissioning in and by itself will only solve part of the problem. It would be costly because there is what I call as a socio-economic impact of decommissioning, in the sense that people will lose their jobs and so on and so forth. So you need to have what is known as just transition. To do that, to ensure that the social fabric is retained in places, mines are not closed, power plants are not closed, jobs are not lost, and so on and so forth, you need to have a just transition. That is converting these power plants to the extent possible to renewable energy, particularly solar. So what are the advantages on this? The cost will be less. You don't have to mitigate all the land. That will be one. You can use existing infrastructure for transmission and distribution of the power. Also, there are technical terms here, which I don't want to get into, but you can convert some of your generators into synchronous condensers and use it to balance the grid, the problem which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So repurposing of power plants is probably the way to go.
Right.
But there are other strategies also. You know, you could have carbon capture and storage and so on. So there's a host of technologies waiting in the wings to move in and help countries transit from coal.
Okay. Yeah. So the next question would be inevitably, when is the oil era ending worldwide? I'm not talking now in the India context. At the beginning of the COVID, breakout and such, we found that oil was hitting, a bottom on pricing. Interestingly, at that point of time, which was very unusual, because when prices fall at that to the levels that it fell at that point of time in, I think, Jan 2020 or so, what happens is that demand is stimulated for oil again. While at the same time, we know the challenges of how oil can't possibly, last for more than about 10,000 days, in the world. So if I look at it that way, when do you see, again, a year I'm asking for, and somewhere tactfully you avoided that when it came to the coal era, when do you think we are going to close this era of oil, which is about 200 years old now?
I think in coal, we would probably come to the end of coal by the year, I'm talking about India, by the year 2060 or 2070.
Wow, that's bad news. Yeah.
No,
by which time we'll have exhausted all the coal mines and decimated our tribals.
No, we won't have exhausted all the coal mines. We would have transited with just transition, as I said, into other forms of energy.
Okay. If that is so, do you see by, say, 2040 or so, a significant transition, let us say under 30% being coal dependence?
I think today, at least in the power generation front, we would move away from coal, not completely, but significantly. But we'll continue using coal in those power plants which are, more modernized, supercritical, ultra-supercritical.
Okay, we have 9 minutes now. So on the oil era, you wanted to say something.
Oil, there have been several prophecies that the end of oil is here and so on and so forth. And you quoted some of them. We use oil in industry and to generate the kind of industrial heat processes, using hydrogen and others may take a while. So oil, I think, would continue a little longer. But there may be a bridge fuel, and that is gas. And we'll continue using more gas and displace oil by using more gas. That's a possibility. To give you a date when oil will end, there are all kinds of forecasts about oil consumption, reducing, oil production reducing, and so on. But in the time frame that we are talking about, the next 30 to 40 years, there'll definitely be a decline in the use of oil. And the fuels which will emerge to substitute for oil and substitute for coal would be, as I said, hydrogen and solar and other forms of renewable energy and biofuels, biofuels generated through renewables.
Can I therefore sort of assume or infer from what you have said that 2040 could see that one significant shift of probably 1/2 of our dependence going away, with the economy having shifted while stabilizing with synchronization and such onto these renewable grids? Would that be a fair assessment of what you said?
Well, 2040 is another 20 years from today, and it's possible that a fair amount of our generation would move towards renewables.
Yeah.
But my book is not on renewables. My book is not on oil, on coal transition. It is on energy efficiency. And what I would definitely like to see is that as we move from the non-renewable forms of energy to renewable forms of energy, we will be able to tap more of our efficiency potential and thereby ease the transition. I think that is very, very important because efficiency is cost effective. It costs less to save a kilowatt hour of energy than to generate a kilowatt of energy.
Sure.
It does not yield any greenhouse gas emissions. And as I said, it is the first fuel. So efficiency could be the vehicle or the bridge to take us from a world dominated by oil and coal to a world dominated by renewables. By 2040, we could possibly make it the changes done if we really recognize the power and potential of energy efficiency. If we are able to harness the potential of energy efficiency to the extent I believe possible, then this transition will be far more easier and it can be done and will be far more cost effective. I think that's the important point. The important point for the government to recognize, as well as for the common citizen to recognize, is that it will be our passport to a world which is green and clean.
Sure. If I was, let's say, a corporate manager, as I said at the beginning of this journey that you took to write this book, I didn't know a thing about energy, let's say. But I'm a smart manager and I'm in decision-making, shall we say, spheres in my company. What is that single reason or single, let's say, takeaway that I should expect from reading your book?
Well, the single reason which a manager could, derive from a book like this is to understand the play of forces that dominated or which influenced the use of energy, for instance, in the industrial sector. And that understanding is extremely important because if you're going to look at the future, you need to understand your past and you should need to understand where you came from. And this book actually provides that kind of information through anecdotes and narratives and all of that about where we came from, that we are inspired, and then we move forward in the future. So it's a kind of book which you normally do not find in the rows of books on energy in libraries. It's not technical, it's jargon-free, it is for the common man, and it provides a host of information on what had happened in the past, but it's not a checklist book.
To those listening to this conversation, I must tell you that at one point of time, it seemed like the book would also, claim right to a title like History of Energy in India. It seemed like that. That Padu had walked into this job with the National Productivity Council about that year. And then we looked at, what had happened to the world. The publisher said, hang on, it's not important what Padu did. You got to look at what the world was doing at that point of time. And we suddenly found Yom Kippur. We found that 1 week's war that Israel launched in 1973, and then the hurdle that, let's say, Indira Gandhi took, and how it led, how the energy crisis in a certain sense, and the sharp surge in prices led to 1975 and the emergency and so on, led us to think, hey, hang on, here is the story of the energy history itself. As you said, we have to go back to our pasts. There are recounts here in the book of what Lal Bahadur Shastri did, for example, at some point in time, in order to have all citizens of this country fast for a day. He said Tuesday is the day when you got to decide to have to forego one lunch or one meal for the day. So India has seen pangs of such famine and hurt. In 1967, you know what happened, how the Green Revolution was born, and how that kind of Green Revolution and agricultural, energy-intensive, shall we say, energy, not in just electrical terms, but energy-intensive practices that, let's say, 700 million people have taken to, thanks to those years of 1969 to 1975, is also part of that recount that this book offers in some ways. My last question to you, we have only about 2 minutes now, and it's a tough one, but I'd like you to, and it's a favorite one with you. For years, I've been chatting this with you, Padu. Beyond energy efficiency, if I am a corporate manager, industrial manager, running, like you say, the boiler room and the boardroom and the connects between the two, what is this energy productivity business that I have to do? Getting into the jargon of it, tell us, Padu, what that means if I am a business manager.
That's an interesting question, Hari. You know, in energy efficiency, you ask the question, how is energy used? How efficient are you? How is energy used? And the answer is straightforward. You do an energy audit.
Absolutely.
Productivity, you don't ask the question, how is energy used? Rather, you ask the question, what is the energy used for? The moment you ask the question, what is the energy used for? Immediately you look at the value that energy brings to that particular industrial company. For instance, do you manufacture just mild steel and that has a certain value, or do you go all the way and manufacture precision tools? Do you manufacture just aluminum ingots, or go all the way and manufacture aluminum fuselages for aeroplanes, which have a much higher value? When you look at energy productivity, then you look at energy value added through unit of energy consumed. A unit of energy gives you much more amount of value.
I got that. And I think I will have to drift away from that because I know necessarily it has to get complicated and technical. Ganesh Vanchiswaran, we are done with this. It's 6 p.m. Thank you so much for having us here. Good morning to you, Padu, and have a great day. Thank you, Ben. Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you so much, Hari. Thanks, Padu.